Welcome to Zoom with Czarny. I'm Dustin Czarny, Democratic Elections Commissioner, and I'm back to my interview show. It's March, and I've taken a couple months off this podcast. I've been doing my commissioner in a car, but here we are in March, and we finally have new congressional maps, which looks like the end of the state redistricting process. So I wanted to have my good friend Jeff Wice of the New York University Law School, who's been on our program several times, but now is talking to us today about how this all came about, a little brief history lesson, and then what happened over the last couple of weeks with the new maps from the IRC that were rejected and changed by the legislature. And also, we look forward to what might be things that might need to change, and I think a lot with the New York IRC. And so learning from this first process and seeing what we can change by 2032 to get a better process in place. So stay tuned for that interview. It's a great interview. As I said, the new maps are in place. Petitions have started. All candidates are out walking petitions as of today. So the petition period didn't change. It's still going to have a filing date in April 1st through the 4th. And the petition numbers haven't changed. And also the legislature approved the map, and the Republicans have all said that they're not going to challenge it. And also the Republicans voted for the map, some of them, not a lot, but a few. So they were bipartisan maps. So we are finally done. And the New York 22 district is changed a lot. It is, and we will be able to get really good registration data on that sometime in April, because we can't do the redistricting until after the presidential primary that's happening on April 2nd. So, but nevertheless, let me get on with my interview with Jeff Wice of New York University Law School, the grandfather of redistricting in New York. And we get to talk about what happened, where we're going, what and what might have to change in the future with redistricting statewide in New York. Enjoy. And we're back, and I'm very happy to have my good friend Jeff Wice on to talk about New York State redistricting. We talked back in December, and we promised to talk when it was all over again, and here we are. And I'm so happy that he was able to make time out of his schedule, that now we finally seem to have an end to redistricting this cycle in New York, we think. But Jeff, thank you so much for coming on Zoom with Czarny again.
My pleasure to be with you today.
So Jeff, just remind people your background. And maybe there's some people that are watching this for the first time, but you're kind of like the grandfather of redistricting here in New York. So tell people about your background and how you've been involved in redistricting for the last few decades.
Okay, well, I am a professor at New York Law School in Manhattan, where I also direct the New York Census and Redistricting Institute. I started back in the late 1970s when I was representing the New York State Assembly in Washington, D.C. The Assembly Democrats, really the Democrats, had never redistricted in modern history. The last time was in 1911, which was really a blip. But ever since then and before then, Republicans drew the maps in New York every 10 years for Congress and the legislature. So by 1978, I was sent out to the Census Bureau on behalf of the Speaker of the Assembly to find out, what is this all about? And New York went on in 1980 to lose 5 congressional districts. That's still a national record, not one that we're proud of, but it's a result of the census. I worked for the speakers of the Assembly from 1980 through the 2000 cycles. In 2010, I was counsel to the Senate Democrats, and have been through 5 of these cycles. I've also worked across New York State and the country from Maine to California. Most recently, I was counsel to the Syracuse City Districting Commission elsewhere up in New York City, Albany, Monroe County, Dutchess County. I'm now working in Orange County on their county legislative redistricting. So I've done this all over the state, write about it, teach about it, and have made this an effort to bring democracy to the people in an area that they're not usually that familiar with.
So we've covered redistricting on this program quite a bit. All of the Syracuse redistricting, the county ledge redistricting, and the state. And we finally seem to have come to an end here, at least for the congressional maps and the assembly maps, and maybe probably the Senate maps now. So the state redistricting seems to have ended. But can you kind of walk us through what happened here in the last couple of weeks with the IRC choosing maps, and then the legislature rejecting them and approving their own maps, which are a lot like the IRC maps? Can you kind of walk us through what happened and maybe tell us why it happened the way it did?
Well, in 2014, New York's voters approved a constitutional amendment crafted by former Governor Cuomo and the Senate Republicans, who were then in control of the Senate. And that ballot question, creating a commission, was approved. What happened was the commission, which was really an advisory commission, although they call it the Independent Commission on paper, it was tasked with developing up to 2 sets of maps to submit to the legislature for approval. If the first round of maps was rejected, they had to submit a second round. And if the second round was rejected, then the legislature could draw its own map. What happened instead in February 2022, just 2 years ago, after the first map was rejected by the legislature, the commission imploded. There was finger pointing between the 5 Democrats, the 5 Republicans. They were not agreeing. The commission basically fell apart. So at that point, the legislature did what a legislature should normally do, and what they thought the Constitution said it should do, to finish the job and draw the maps. Well, the same day the governor signed the maps into law, at least at that point for the state Senate and congressional maps, Republicans went to court in Bath, New York, in Steuben County, south of Rochester, Syracuse, near the Pennsylvania border. And eventually, the trial court, the appellate division, the Court of Appeals all ruled that the legislature did not have the power to draw the maps until and after the second set of maps were rejected. And because there was so little time left in 2022 before the primaries, which had to be delayed a bit, the court ordered a special master, an expert familiar in redistricting, to draw the maps. The assembly map had not been challenged at that point, so that was off the table. The map the legislature drew for the assembly was used, but the court drew the map in 2022 for the state Senate, and for the congressional districts, and elections were held. Well, later in 2022, a group of Democrats went to Albany County Court, and they asked the court there to direct the commission to go back to work, excuse me, and send that second set of maps to the legislature for Congress. And at first, the trial judge in Albany said, no, this is a once-in-a-decade process. You're too late. It's over with. But he was reversed by the appellate division, and the appellate division reversal was upheld just last December by the Court of Appeals, the state's highest court. And the Court of Appeals directed the IRC, the Independent Redistricting Commission, to go back to the drawing boards, develop a congressional map, send it to the legislature by February 28th, which was yesterday. And that's what happened. The commission got back to work. They didn't fight amongst each other. They actually, with some new members, got along very well. And they were able to agree on a 9-to-1 vote. There were 10 members, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans. 9 of them voted in favor of a map. 1 Democrat voted no. That map, which was 95% of the map drawn by the special master in 2022, that map was sent to the legislature about a week and a half ago. And earlier this week, I guess on Monday, the legislature returned to Albany and rejected that map arguing that it split too many communities of interest, it split too many counties. They weren't specific in their criticisms, but they said they had criticisms, and it was their prerogative to reject the map. And then late Tuesday, the legislature, the Assembly, and Senate Democrats released their own map, which was also very, very similar to the commission's map, which of course was similar to the court's map, and it made changes in about 10 districts. So yesterday, on Wednesday of this week, both the Assembly and the Senate adopted their own map with the support of Republican members in both the Senate and the Assembly. The governor signed the plan late yesterday afternoon, and the Republicans who challenged the plan the very same day a map was enacted 2 years ago, they announced that they were happy with the map, that there were no real legal problems with it. So where we are now is we have a new legislative drawn congressional map. We have a legislative drawn assembly map because the assembly was taken to court last year, which it had not been 2 years ago, and the court simply said, whatever your map has in it doesn't matter. You didn't vote on a second commission map, so therefore we're invalidating the map. IRC went back to work, developed a new assembly map. Legislature approved it with very minor changes. The Senate map was drawn by the court, and no one's gone back to court to ask the court to then tell the commission, go back to work now and draw the Senate map. The underlying reason for all of this being that the Court of Appeals changed membership last year. There's a new chief judge. And Judge Rowan Wilson, in his majority opinion in this congressional case in December, wrote that it is not the job of the courts to draw these districts. It's the job of the legislature. So let's pick up and finish the process where it left off, and let's have all the maps contested in court, drawn by the legislature, not the courts. So here we are today without a challenge to the congressional map, with the assembly maps said and done, and the Senate map still being the one drawn by the court in 2022. And now we can move ahead starting today, this week, Thursday, with petitioning for the June 25th primary.
So it looks like we're done with all of this. The Senate map is still kind of, I guess somebody could bring a suit saying that the second.
If I'll put it this way, if somebody went to court and argued that the Senate map needs to be drawn by the legislature, that a court plan is a temporary plan, and there's a 99.9% chance the courts will say, yes, the commission, go back and redraw the Senate map, send it to the legislature, and everything is said and done. I know that some senators don't like their districts, but that isn't reason to send the commission back to work again. A big reason for that being that if the commission goes back to work because some senators don't like their districts, that means that you're favoring or disfavoring incumbents or political parties, and that's one of the criteria the state constitution says you can't do.
Okay, so let's talk about what happened on Monday. Because I think there's a lot of confusion out there, and of course there's always you and I are both Democrats. We want Democrats to win, but we also are advocates for fair redistricting. And there's a lot of advocates across the country and locally who look at, say, oh, North Carolina, look what they did. They maximalized their gerrymander. New York should do the same. And I'm of the mind that New York could not do the same, even under the ruling that we got from the appellate court. And it looks like what happened in the legislature when they rejected the maps, they only moved the lines about 2%, which is under the rule they're allowed to do, to basically make changes that they felt the New York IRC just missed, communities of interest. And they made a couple of districts better for Democrats and a couple of districts better for Republicans, but it looks like they actually fulfilled what the constitutional language says, which is that the legislature's role can be to reject the maps as long as they're only going to move the lines 2% in every district to protect communities of interest. Or am I being too Pollyannish here? Is that what happened?
What happened was the legislature made changes to the commission map. A state law, you referenced a 2% rule. That was a statute enacted in 2012, and it limited the legislature from changing any district in the commission map by more than 2% of the district's population. So as an example, if you had a district of 100,000 people, you couldn't change more than 2,000 of those people. You had to keep 98,000 in the same new district. Now, that was a statute. The Constitution didn't say anything about that. The Constitution, in fact, said that the legislature could draw a plan, quote, as it deems necessary. So what the legislature did in its congressional bill was added language that, as lawyers would write, notwithstanding any other provision of law, which basically overrode that 2% rule statute. They didn't repeal it, they overrode it, which then let the legislature work not within 2%, but they went as high as 5 or 6%. They changed some districts by 10, 20, 30,000 people. Keep in mind that each congressional district has about 770,000 people in them, and 2% of that is 15,000. And you can't do that much with 15,000 people to really change the possible outcome of a race. But they went beyond that, but they were allowed to do that. There was a lot of confusion over the 2% rule, different nuances, but no one's challenging it now. And the legislature had every perfect right to override that law, which I think was impractical when it was enacted in 2012. But it was Andrew Cuomo's effort to prevent wholesale changes to benefit political parties. And that's what didn't happen this week. I think in response to your question, there are a number of factors. Everybody's getting tired. They want to run elections this year. Republicans voted to weaken the district in the Syracuse area represented by Brandon Williams. They all voted for that. And the map that came out this week helped Republicans on Long Island. It helped one Democrat on Long Island. It did a swap within a New York City, Westchester district of residents. And then it made the district represented by Congressman Mark Molinaro in the Hudson Valley, already a competitive district, a little bit more blue. That's all it did. And the Republicans said, this isn't enough to go to court. And who knows, maybe the Republicans are running low on money to pay for a lawsuit. But the Democrats also, they didn't have the luxury, the power, the ability to do what the Republicans did in North Carolina. North Carolina's state Supreme Court once said you can't draw lines to favor Republicans. But then North Carolina elects their judges, and they change the makeup of their state's top court. New York appoints their top judges. So in North Carolina, they went from a liberal court to a conservative court last year, and the Republicans went back to the new conservative court and got the liberal court reversed to say there is no such thing as partisan gerrymandering in North Carolina. So the Republicans there don't have any rules to follow. So they could eliminate 3 blue districts. But to do that in New York would have meant that maybe even the new Court of Appeals in New York wouldn't go as far as to allow a really egregious overgrab of power. And that's something I don't think the Democrats wanted to have egg on their face for the second time in a row.
Right. And I mean, I'd like to thank the Republicans that made the Syracuse area district a little bit better for Democrats. Thank you. But so yeah, I mean, and I'm looking at this map, and I'm seeing a lot of districts that on paper look like they swing Democratic, but in practicality in 2022 they did not, and they seem like a lot of swing districts that will swing not based on the party, but based on the type of election year, like whether it's a presidential election year, whether it's a midterm. And we saw that in the Syracuse area back in the old 2024, or New York 24 maps, where, before the 2012 redistricting, we ping pong back and forth based on whether it was a midterm or a presidential. And it looks like to me like a lot of these districts have the potential to do that.
Well, that's true. Three factors go into what could happen. First is you need good candidates, well-funded, good candidates with good messages. Second, you have to have good issues. And then third, you need to have high turnout. Democrats, may or may not have had good candidates, but the issues, the ability of Lee Zeldin 2 years ago to campaign on crime in the downstate New York area, where 8 or 9 counties are covered by New York City media, it was crime, 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 taxes, economy, immigration. And that resonated out on Long Island, where 2 congressional districts and several state legislative districts went from Democratic to Republican. But with a good candidate this year in the same district that George Santos won 2 years ago, Tom Suozzi rebounded and won that seat back for the Democrats. So
In a special election, which was kind of a
in a
low turnout
snowstorm.
election, right? I mean,
Yeah, so it really depends on things we can't predict yet in November as to how good candidates will be. You think in New York, I'm not speaking as a partisan here, but we'd expect that Donald Trump will not do well in New York State. But what happens if he does do well and carries in, we had former Governor Al Smith once told an up-and-coming politician who no one was doing anything to campaign for that he was worried. And Governor Smith told him, "Don't worry, kid. I'm the ferry boat and you're the flotsam and jetsam. I'm going to pull you all in with me." Well, that isn't, we'll see if that happens again this year.
right. And I think, unfortunately, the governor's race 2 years ago, you're right. The Zeldin was able to, he was the he was the ferry boat, bringing some of these
Right.
Republican candidates in,
So,
even though he didn't win. But so you kind of mentioned this earlier that, there was a lot of, especially in 2022, a lot of extreme problems with the New York IRC, unable to meet, unable to come up with a second set of maps. And that really kind of started us down the path of this multi-year court battle now, and a special master drawing maps and all of that. I mean, it really comes back to the New York IRC's failure to come together back in 2022, though they did come together in 2024. So I guess some would say they learned a lesson, but is the New York IRC, you and I have been on media programs and we both said the same thing, that it seems like it's designed to fail. It seemed like it was like a constitutional amendment that envisioned a split in the legislature. And so thus that was the kind of break that would keep things from going awry, because nobody would want, everybody would be deal making because there would be a split in the legislature. And then once the Democrats took over the legislature and had 2/3 majority, there was no, motive for the Republicans on the IRC to actually come up with better maps, in that second round. So what do you think, that the New York IRC is doomed to fail, or do you think they need minor changes or a complete overhaul?
I would overhaul it. First off, I would preferably not have the commission members appointed by the legislative leaders. Even though they did a pretty good job of walling themselves off from each other, we should do what Syracuse did and have citizens, regular voters, be able to submit their names and have somebody such as an auditor go through the vetting process and winnow it down to a citizen-based commission. That can include, let's say, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, 4 independents, but then you also need, secondly, to have a commission that has a tie-breaking vote. And you also need to have a commission that is open and transparent. New York has an open meetings law, and that requires all meetings to be open to the public once you have a quorum of that body. And usually most bodies have quorums to conduct business. But to draw maps, what the state commission did, what commissions did across the county commissions, they created subgroups of less than a quorum, let's say 2 or 3 members, 1D, 1R, let's say, to sit down and draw maps in private. And that's what the IRC did. They worked in small groups amongst themselves and never held a public mapping meeting, something that California did, that Michigan did, that states with really independent commissions have done. And we conducted all of our meetings. I was counsel to the Syracuse Commission. And everything we did was open to the public. It was also during the pandemic, so everything was via Zoom, so it was really easy to do. You also need to have better criteria, a criteria that is ranked in priority order, so that if you meet one criteria, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's some method to your methodology as to what you're doing. You need to make sure that at the front end, the commission is adequately staffed and funded. For the first year it was authorized, when Andrew Cuomo was still governor, he was trying to control the commission. He was denying them funding and staffing, and there was a court case over that as well. And he finally backed off, and the legislature took over the budget and allocated them funds. So there are lots of things that need changing. The way the votes are set up. Also, you had ostensibly 4 Democratic members appointed by the legislative leaders and 4 Republicans, who then picked 2 independents. Well, what happened was the Republicans picked an independent Republican or conservative, and the Democrats picked an independent liberal. So they lined up 5-5. And that was a problem. So you can look at every level of how the commission was set up, and there's a problem with it. But the problems led us to know to lead us to better solutions. And that's what I'm going to be working on, is to propose a number of steps that could improve and tighten up the process. Let's just be mindful that before this commission had been created, the legislature, Assembly, Senate would simply pass these maps on their own with very little public input.
I think that's the legitimate criticisms of the New York IRC, and especially the public input. The 2022 version of the IRC had the, public drawing the maps and testimony and all of that. But when it came down to the second round of maps in 2024, the commission decided no public hearings, no more input, or I guess they would allow input, but they pretty much decided, nope, we're gonna vote on the map. We didn't even know when they were gonna vote on the map until like 2 days before they held the hearing. There was no discussion at the hearing. They already had the deal in place, and it was over. And I'm not criticizing the map itself. I actually think the map itself was okay, but I also believe in public input and doing this thing in sunlight, and they didn't really achieve that, in my opinion.
That follows a pattern in New York. You just be mindful. I worked for the Assembly majority for 3 rounds of this, so I was playing inside baseball. But usually you start off having a listening tour. You listen to the public. What would you like to see us do? Then you draw a draft plan, and you go out and hold hearings again. And then you draw a final plan, but then you just vote on it. What you should do is hold one more round of hearings, and the Constitution didn't require that, and the Court of Appeals didn't require that. So the commission didn't do something that it wasn't required to do. That's what happened in the last month. They weren't required to hold a hearing. The court even said, based on the Constitution, you've got to hold a round of hearings before a draft map can be voted on. And they did that. But so there's a lot of hoopla, there's a lot of press attention and focus, but then it all narrows down to secrecy. And that's how the plans from 1980 until 2024 have been enacted every 10 years. It's usually within a 24 to 48 hour period, just enough time for a bill to age to be voted on when the bill is rolled out. I was counsel to the Senate Democrats in 2012. We had lost the majority. Republicans were back in power, and I accompanied the Democratic member to the redistricting committee, and they roll out a new map for the Senate. No advance notice. We didn't get an advance copy, and they voted on it. and it was a party line vote where it was set up with this committee that the majority wins of both chambers. So the Democratic minority senator I was with basically takes his papers, throws them up in the air and says, this has been a waste of time and money, just to make the point that why bother doing this? And here again, we've spent millions of dollars on redistricting. Democrats spent millions of dollars probably on this lawsuit and said they didn't get very much out of it in terms of trying to pick up 6 districts back from the Republicans that they claim were lost in 2022, which I don't agree with.
Yeah, and I also think that no matter what the form of the New York IRC, I think there's a fallacy out there of that. And I believe in bipartisanship. I'm part of a bipartisan election commission. I like having representation from both parties there. And I think that's the way it should be on the New York IRC. But, somebody said to me the other day, and I think it's a valid point, is that, there was equal representation on the New York IRC. There's not equal registration in New York. And so it kind of created a power mismatch in the terms of, right now in New York, non-enrolleds outnumber the number of Republicans statewide, but the Republicans had equal representation, Democrats had equal representation. You're right, the so-called independents had 2 representations that were picked by the Democrats and Republicans. So it really wasn't reflected. And that's why I also believe in citizen-led. You and I worked on the Syracuse commission together in me getting it open and done, and you and getting it through. And I love that model because I think it's more reflective of the community as a whole. Not necessarily this arbitrary standard that isn't the case in New York anymore. So I don't know. That's something that I think we need to have a discussion about as well. So real quick, Jeff, because this doesn't mean I'm not going to talk to you again until 2032, because, well, 2032 is not that far away, but there are county redistricting battles going on. The viewers of this program may know about the Onondaga County one. I can't really talk about that because I'm part of the lawsuit there. So we're not going to talk about Onondaga County, but there's a few other counties that are doing county legislature redistricting court cases. Just briefly tell us what's going on there and let us know, see what's going on across the state, because redistricting is not over.
Yeah, there are a few cases. Challengers were successful in Broome County in getting the legislature to redraw a map that was unfair, and they won at the appellate level, and a fairer map was drawn there based on the lawsuit of nonpartisan voters. In Nassau County, litigation is ongoing over whether the Republicans failed to create a necessary number of minority districts. Nassau County has several lawsuits against it with a Republican majority legislature. Not only is there a straightforward lawsuit challenging the map brought by Democrats, but the civil rights and voting rights groups have brought a lawsuit challenging under the new John R. Lewis New York State Voting Rights Act. So there are 2 trials to go to court challenging Nassau. There's a case lingering in Orleans County that might be refiled over failure to follow the state municipal home rule law criteria. There's a case pending against the New York City Council. I was counsel to the New York City Council Commission. I think it's a baseless lawsuit, and the state Supreme Court agreed, but nonetheless, it's being appealed with very little chance of success, arguing that additional Asian districts should have been created when the law did what the law requires, but I'll leave that one alone at that. Those are basically the remaining challenges around the state, but what's new and different and developing is that the legislature enacted this New York State John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act, named after the late congressman and civil rights leader from Georgia, and that allows voters or organizations to challenge unfair electoral laws at the county, town, city level, basically challenging what you have where you have at-large town boards where rather than elect representatives, legislators from single districts, as you have in Onondaga County in the New York legislature, you elect, let's say, 4 or 5 members at large, where all voters vote for all candidates, and that denies the minority voters the chance to elect their preferred candidates. It shuts them out because if you try to run one minority candidate in a community with 20% population, they'll be outvoted. So we have challenges pending, as I mentioned, in Nassau County. There's one in the town of Mount Pleasant in Westchester County, another one pending in the town of Cheektowaga in Erie County, and another one in the Hudson Valley. I've been retained by most of the towns to advise them, so the last one isn't public yet, but you're going to see more of those kinds of challenges as well. And that's going to percolate and more people will know about it. Also, a number of counties, and I'm not sure if Onondaga is on the list or not, but any change that your office and the Board of Elections makes, or that the county legislature makes, or that a town government makes, impacting how elections are conducted, would need to be pre-cleared or pre-approved by the state attorney general's office before they can go into effect. So you're going to see a lot of action there. And biggest of all, I'm not going to go away, is that we're going to look to reform the state process before 2028. That means a lot of work this year, next year, in 2026 and 7. So I certainly will be in contact with you a lot on that one.
Well, I'm in because this has been a mess, and it's been kind of a national laughing stock, and some of that undeserved. But I love my state, and I know we can do better. And I think that we can fix this redistricting so it's fair and routine and automatic, and we don't go through the years of redistricting and millions of dollars, not just in lawsuits, but public money on extra elections and everything like that we've had. So Jeff, thank you so much. Oh, by the way, Onondaga is in the pre-clearance. And that will start in September, and I'll be doing more on that and what that means for Onondaga and why we're in pre-clearance for the New York Voting Rights Act. It's not anything we did, it's about the level of poverty in Syracuse, and that would brought us into pre-clearance. And I actually think it's a good thing. I was an advocate for the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act, so now I'm going to have to do a lot more work, but that's okay. So we'll talk about that at a later date.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for coming
Oh,
in.
my pleasure. Thank you for having me on again.
And that was my conversation with Jeff Wice, the grandfather of New York Redistricting. I'm very happy that he was on the program. And I'm happy I'm getting back on track with my Zoom with Czarnys. Next week on Zoom with Czarny, I will have the village of Fayetteville Democratic candidates. There are a couple of candidates running on the Democratic line for mayor and trustee out there. And they also have an interesting proposition to move their village elections to November. Looking forward to that conversation. That'll be next Friday. I plan on having a weekly wonk this weekend. I will be doing my weekly wonk this weekend will be finally DustinZarny.com year 2. I've been planning this. I actually have the data together. I just haven't had the time to write it, but that's my plan. Get that up there this weekend. And then starting this weekend, again, the weekly wonks will be coming weekly as I've taken the months of January and February off on that. My commissioner in car next week will continue as well. Next week, we will be talking about the village elections. We have 3 villages having elections, actually 5 villages having elections in March. Fayetteville, Minoa, Manlius, they're all run by the Board of Elections. And then there's Marcellus and a couple others, or one other. I'm not really sure which one the other one is. That is being run by the village clerks. We'll talk about the differences, what's different about it when a board runs it, when a village clerk runs it, and when it's in March as opposed to November. So next week is my village election special. So for Commissioner Nagar. So stay tuned for that. Thank you very much. Remember to go to DustinZarny.com. You can like and subscribe, and you will get an email notification every time yeah, I post something. I usually post something once a day, maybe sometimes only 4 times a week. But all my content's there, but also election news are there. And so check it out. It's always free, and I do it because of my need for public outreach. In my position, I pay for it myself. I don't take it outside money. I won't do advertisements. It's all free, and I think pretty informative. So check it out. Thank you very much, and enjoy your new congressional maps and the political season that is starting right now.